Technology. We're going to be talking about the latest trends in tech, opportunities in the digital sector, the complexities of investing in technology, etc. Lots to talk about. We have a great panel for you today. I'm hoping that our speakers will share some of their personal experiences with us, and I'll introduce them very shortly. One thing I will mention now is, as per usual, I'd like to make this session interactive. In the second half, we will open up the floor for discussion, and everyone will have the opportunity to ask questions or make comments. So, on to our panelists. To my left, furthest to my left, is Matei, Paun. For those of you, probably the minority here, that don't already know him, Matei has many years of professional experience in the financial and capital markets of Central Europe and the CIS. He is a funder and currently a managing partner of BAC Investment Banking. In the last 5 years, BAC has actually closed transactions of over 2 million euros across the region. Matei was also, Matei started his career with Firebird Management in New York. He then went on to become the country manager of Regent Pacific, a financial group with a large presence in the region. Matei was also the founder of HTI, one of the largest independent Romanian brokerage house, which was sold to Morgan Stanley in 2007. I think many of you will probably have seen Matei very recently in news coverages. He has been one of the key supporters of Nicu Șordan's election campaign, as you all know. And the next gentleman on our panel is Andrei Pogonaru. I have to admit that I'm rather surprised to see him here on the stage. I mean, the place that I usually see him, or I most frequently find him, is in the kitchen at home cooking breakfast. For as long as I have known Andrei, he's almost obsessive pursuit of the latest technology has never faltered. So I met Andrei at school while we were both studying or pretending to be studying at Cambridge. Upon graduating, he went on to fund Goodbee, which was the first ever mobile banking business in Romania, and he also completed its exit in a very short space of time. He then briefly shifted his attention to energy, and he co-developed the first solar power plant in Romania that was over 5 megawatts at the time. Andrei also founded the private equity management arm of Central European Financial Services. He's currently running a number of CEFS's portfolio investments, including a large commercial real estate development in the center of Bucharest. A lot of you know this as the Veranda Mall. And apparently it will be the greenest ever shopping center in Bucharest, and it will be open to the public before Christmas this year. Andrei has also been serving as a member of the boards of various Romanian companies, including Transelectrica, the national grid of Romania. Andrei is also on the board of United Way, an incredible NGO which works with a coalition of charitable organizations to pool funding and resources. So, Matei and Andrei, thank you for being with us today. Let's dive straight in. There was an Economist cover that some of you probably remember from a while ago. and it had an image of Rodin's bronze sculpture, The Thinker. It was in its usual pose, sat like this, but he sat on a toilet. And the caption said, "Will we ever invent something this great again?" And I think we have. When we think of the digital revolution and disruptive technology, the one thing that has caused a huge impact and is still continuing to cause changes in our lives is probably the one thing that all of us carry with us. I mean, it really is the mobile digital disruption. Let's do a quick show of hands. How many of us here have a smartphone with us? Put your hands up. Okay. No surprises there. Follow-up question. How many of us have a second smart device? Can be a phone, can be an iPad, a Kindle, an Apple Watch. Yeah. Still, that's probably 90%. I mean, I could continue with this line of questioning and ask you about your third and fourth device, but I'll ask something else. How many of you brought your TV with you? Okay. I think the number of hands that just went up, or the lack of, tells a pretty good story about the power of our devices. This thing that we carry with us is absolutely incredible. The computing power that this thing contains apparently is 100,000 times more than the power of that one machine that sent the first man to the moon. And you know, even aside from the power of computing, the more important metric, if we think about it, is probably the cost. I'm sure that all the phones in this room probably cost hundreds of euros. I hope that estimate is reasonably accurate. I mean, if any of us here has a phone made with 24-karat gold, I would suggest that you come and see Andrei at the end of the session and maybe try and sponsor our next Aspen Ideas Festival. So what I was going to say is that I read actually a piece in the FT very recently which said that in the poorer parts of the world, the price of smartphones that is fully capable of probably running all the applications that we run nowadays, the price of that has dropped to 20 euros. And it's very likely that the rate of adoption of first smartphones in those poorest parts of the world outpaces the adoption of both water and electricity. And that's tremendous. And I think that this really is the one single piece of technological equipment that everyone has access to. Let me move on to my panelist. Andrei, you funded the first mobile banking business in Romania many years back. Can you talk us through the process, how the ideas came about, how you brought the technology and the funding, and how you eventually sold the business?
Sure. Wow. Thanks for that. Great. Well, okay. So, no, actually, this is completely not prepared. So, the dynamic of the smartphone coming to bringing this wonderful piece of technology to the world has been going on for many years, as you probably know. And the key in having this wonderful piece of technology has been providing, especially African countries, with the power to leapfrog and provide delivery of basic financial services on top of the existing mobile infrastructure. And that had been going on for years, actually, when we first looked at it in 2005, 2006. And that had been going on precisely because there was no banking infrastructure, and also because of something which was much more unpleasant, which was a very high crime rate, especially in South Africa, which motivated people to not carry any cash, but rather to carry to have access to their accounts, whether they were bank accounts or mobile money accounts through services like M-Pesa, on their phones. It's much, much safer that way. And we knew about this going on, and we knew that this was a piece of technology that could potentially work in other countries, based on some very basic trial and error. We managed to contact a few companies, and we found the one that was most open to customizing and implementing this technology with the peculiarities of Romania. And this is where it became rather interesting, because the challenges in Romania were more bureaucratic. It was about the National Bank being able to understand the product. It was about customizing it to the needs of Romanians. And in the end, we did manage to do so, but then the financial crisis hit. And one thing I've learned through this process is that the users of mobile devices and the way that they interact with them is completely universal. The same problems which came through, for instance, for user interface, were the same problems that we had in Romania. The peculiarities that came from the institutions of the place, the licensing a credit card which comes linked to your mobile phone and your bank account is apparently a lot easier to do in South Africa than it is in Romania. And we built up so the story of the startup itself is that we then built it up together with the largest bank in Romania, with Erste Bank, and then they took over it, and this happened in 2007, and they absorbed it as one of their alternative channels. And they absorbed and implemented this piece of software. And it was a very, very interesting experience, both in terms of understanding technology trend and in terms of customizing it locally for a Romanian need. And I think, yeah, that pretty much answers that.
How many years ago was it that you sold the business?
I guess it was about 8 years ago.
You said that the technical issues that it faced in South Africa, in Romania, or anywhere else was pretty much identical. Do you feel that any of the other issues or the views that you held at the time before starting Goodbee or while developing Goodbee have changed 8 years later, or some of the issues that you'd be looking at differently now?
No, I mean, the excitement of taking a piece of technology wherever from the world it may come from and trying to implement that in the local context is something that I still enjoy. It's wonderful to see how some of the really established companies today were then startups. So when we did the mobile banking venture, PayPal was up and coming, and what's wonderful to see nowadays is to see how some of the same payment companies are being themselves disrupted. Just this week we've seen a Turkish payments provider raise some serious funds and expand into the Middle East. So I guess the mentality of trying to bring technology or trying to invest in technology or even trying to copy ideas from technology is the same. And it's really exciting to see that in the context of what I do today, which is real estate, and to see how localization technologies are really being applied to Romania in particular. So in that sense, I haven't changed much. I'm still looking for whatever I can use and grow in Romania.
Thank you. You're saying that PayPal is itself being disrupted today, which is a really interesting point to make. the interaction between finance and technology, I mean, the so-called fintech nowadays is probably even hotter than ever. In a quite recent report that came out recently, Citigroup said specifically that the private money that went into fintech in 2010 was probably around 2 billion. And that number alone has increased to 20 in the space of 5 years. So that was how much went into fintech in 2015. Matei, I know that you didn't fund a fintech startup, but you have been on the other side, the established side, for probably almost all of your career to date. You have a Wall Street background, you started in asset management, and you spent some time in financial consulting, and now you run one of the regional investment banks. So that probably makes you one of the most informed people in finance here to assess the sort of influence that technologies such as, blockchain, big data, machine learning, AI have, the impact that they have on finance. Are the banks or even PayPal nowadays waiting around to be kicked out of water by the newer comers like Apple Pay, the Lending Club, etc.? What are some of your thoughts?
Well, let me start by, first of all, thanking Andrei for giving me this respite. I spent the last 10 weeks running a campaign, which is something I don't usually do. And,
we'll definitely come to that.
And it's great to kind of take myself out of that mental space. And I particularly resonated with the previous not board, but panel. I think there were a lot of interesting points that were made. To answer your question, I mean, to be very frank, it's a bit of an odd question because technology, particularly fintech, as it were, in this part of the world, I think, has yet to make any significant or meaningful inroad. There is no AI, there is no blockchain, there is none of that. You hardly have meaningful online banking. You don't have, as Andrei alluded to earlier, you don't have a friendly regulatory space in which you could innovate and come up with all sorts of, interesting financial products and mechanisms and what have you. The sharing economy is barely rearing its head
in this part
in this part of the world. So,
feel most free to comment on from a bigger perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
Or do you think Romania is at any point catching up to what's happening elsewhere?
I mean, it's catching up in some ways, but it's years behind the curve. You've got companies like eMag, which is the local version of Amazon, which has made some tremendous inroads. You've got some flower delivery companies. You've got this and that. You've got Uber. But by and large, I fail to really see. I mean, first of all, the problem is we don't have risk capital as we understand it in the West. You don't have this burgeoning community of risk takers, of venture capitalists, of angel investors. People are not culturally attuned to that. People, when they invest money in something, they expect a return, and they expect a significant return. Otherwise, they leave their money in the bank. That's how things work here, for better or for worse. I have friends that work in Silicon Valley and London and what have you, and it's a completely different mind space. We've had some clients, clients already is a big word, I think, but we've developed some relationships with some startups locally here, and there was hardly anything to do with them here. It was all about introducing them to this financial ecosystem out in London or out
from elsewhere.
Of course. So in that sense, I think we're easily perhaps a decade behind or that's my sense anyway. You know.
So just to add some, I think for the most part you're right, but people expect a return anywhere, and then that's sort of. But what I see from my perspective is, well, we have a very limited private equity fund that looks at certain businesses that we could invest in. The risk capital is completely lacking, absolutely. There's barely any venture capital, there's even less below that. But you do see entrepreneurship, and you do see these burgeoning, or at least inchoate hubs, where you do have maybe a focus on outsourcing, maybe an unhealthy focus on outsourcing, but you do get young people putting their resources, their time, their energy into creating IT companies that are maybe focusing on the ephemeral trends of the IT world, but they're learning, they're interacting with international companies, and slowly and surely you may see them come up with more coherent, financeable ventures. And I see that sort of struggle going on in Romania, and I certainly see this as a phase. It's a phase in our development, and yeah, we're far away from fintech. We're far away from having innovative companies work on blockchains, but you might have that in a few years after the people that are now focusing on catching the next big outsourcing opportunity, which is much easier to see as a return in the short term. Once they get past that and they have the experience, they might look at much longer term businesses and look for those niches which then get the interest of venture capitalists. So my perspective is a bit more optimistic.
I mean, while we're on the topic of investing in the Romanian technology sector, it's also worth pointing out that Romania is probably one of the places that's policy-wise very friendly, probably both from a tax and subsidy perspective to people and businesses, to people working in tech, and the businesses that obviously employ these people. What are your views on that?
I don't think that's important. I think that.
I don't think that makes a difference.
Not really. I think we'd like to think it makes a difference, but at the end of the day, it's the per capita cost of an IT engineer, and you compare that with Zurich, you compare that with Warsaw, you compare that with whatever city in Europe, or it could be India, it could be anywhere. And these subsidies and these fiscal policies obviously have a role in determining what the bottom line is. But I think what would have a much bigger role is a much greater government focus on the educational side of the equation. I think that turning out a greater number of IT and software engineers would ultimately have a far greater impact on the bottom line than whether we tax them at 16% or 21% or what have you. And I think that there's a big disconnect. And from my discussions with other software entrepreneurs, there's clearly a huge disconnect between what the educational system turns out, particularly in Bucharest. It's a bit different in Cluj, but in Bucharest there's absolutely no connection between what the market requires and what the educational system generates. And I think government policies to that end are probably far more likely to have an impact than subsidies or the ultimate tax rate. That's not to say, I mean, there are plenty of smart people working in IT in Romania, and I was recently in Cluj meeting with software companies, and it's amazing what's happened. But as soon as, I think, a group of young, talented software, or let's say IT-focused people get together, come up with an idea, they'll be out of here within weeks, if not months, pitching to venture capitalist funds all over Europe, all over North America. We simply don't have the infrastructure, the ecosystem to allow them to to nurture their ideas, to create a path towards a successful
ecosystem.
launch of a company and of a product.
Andrei?
So yeah, I more or less agree with that completely. The only, well, the exciting thing is also when someone, and especially clever people in Romania who have the programming experience, take an idea from abroad and try to apply it into Romania. Because what's exciting about that is that a lot of the time it's done without proper funding, without resources, and sometimes it's successful. Like you've mentioned the example of eMag or flower delivery. That's the sort of entrepreneurial spirit, and even though it's implementing an idea to the peculiarities of the local system, it's exciting to see it work. I have friends in the audience who have used technology in a local context to develop a brilliant engineering consulting business, and they're sponsoring the event, so they're obviously doing quite well. I've had the experience of seeing in the retail business, in the commercial real estate business where I'm involved in right now, seeing some extremely interesting applications that, yes, the idea wasn't new, but it was implemented to the Bucharest retail market, which is so underdeveloped and so peculiar, and it was done so well, taking the idea of using your mobile phone and using it as a location device within a shopping mall, and getting people to pay attention to certain stores as opposed to others. That was adapted to the 4 or 5 shopping malls of Bucharest in a way that showed great imagination. And, you know, at least those are very encouraging examples. As for people taking their education, and as outdated as the Romanian IT education system is, I don't know, I've always had mixed feelings about how relevant it is to be prepared exactly for the moment where you join the workforce. I mean, in our cases, we both studied maths, and neither of us have really used maths as anything other than an academic pursuit. So it's always, as Ortega y Gasset used to say, the amoeba of education that then shifts into the shape of the requirement of the actual labor market. And, you know, yeah, there's still a lot of investment to be done in education in Romania. There's still a lot to be done just to keep up the standard, especially in IT education. No doubt about that. But linking it to the actual requirements of the labor force is just, in my opinion, too much of a moving target sometimes. So it's a very vast topic to discuss, and so that's
We appreciate that. I think we've heard quite a lot on how risky capital is not coming to Romania. Technology quickly enough, or the education system isn't catching up quickly enough to produce the sort of talent that we need. I think we should probably move on to a slightly more optimistic note. Let's talk about technology and politics. Local elections happened, concluded a few days ago on Sunday, I think. And I think technology has definitely affected the way people here receive and process information, how people react to both private and public events. And I think there's one thing there's definitely the expectation that we will get more access to candidates than we ever could, than was ever possible to political candidates or otherwise. And Matei, you are one of the key supporters of one of the candidates in the mayoral campaign in Bucharest. And as you were saying earlier, you spent the last 10 weeks, I imagine, focused on this. So what are your thoughts on the role that technology played in this campaign?
Well, I was actually his campaign manager.
Oh.
So
you have even more to share with us.
Well, I have mixed feelings about technology, and I have mixed feelings about its role in politics. Clearly, there's no denying that as a transmission mechanism, as a tool, as someone accurately mentioned in the previous panel, it can be very valuable. But in and of itself, it won't solve our problems. Without a doubt, had we not had access to Facebook or Google or YouTube, we wouldn't have done anything. And the fact that we went from 0 to 30% and became the second largest political force in the capital of Romania is certainly due to a large extent to the existence of Facebook and Google and to a lesser extent YouTube. But ultimately, what people need and what political campaigns need and what politics require is content, and its people and its ideas and its visions and its it's that content really that is so key and that is so hard to generate. There's nothing easier than to post something on Facebook and boost it. And sure, you can target various segments, and you can target housewives in between the age of 40 and 45 living in a particular district of Bucharest, and that can be great. But without that critical element of content, it means nothing. And I particularly resonated with a comment someone made on the previous panel, saying that, it's politics ultimately is about bricks and mortar. It's about getting those people out there to vote. And until we have electronic voting from the comfort of your bedroom, technology is just, it's by no means a panacea. And I don't want people to have this false hope that technology will solve all our problems. Technology might solve a lot of our problems in the health sector. It might solve a lot of our problems from belonging to society, feeling integrated, what have you. But I'm not personally convinced at this point that technology will solve our problems as democracies, as a substitute for the democratic and for the political mechanism that I think we're all still in search of, and I think that the rise of these new parties across Europe, both good and bad, because it's certainly not been only good parties, quote unquote, and here it doesn't really matter which side of the equation you're on. These problems, I think, are with us regardless of technology. And for me as a campaign manager, sure, it became easier to maybe bring 1,000 people in the street at a particular point in place. But it's not all that it's cracked up to be, is what I'm trying to say. And it's really it's a lot more than just having access to these tools. It makes it a bit more democratic. It makes it a bit more accessible, but I think we're a long ways away from solving our problems, our political problems, using technology. That's my feeling, in Romania on whatever today is, in 2016. That may change with time, but that's how I feel.
I imagine that view applies quite universally.
I hope not. I'm an eternal optimist, so I hope things are a bit different in other places. I was very encouraged by the previous speaker from Estonia, so I hope we'll get there. But again, as that particular speaker mentioned, it's about having the civic education, and it's about having that layer of civic consciousness and of willing to volunteer and willing to get involved. If you don't have that, then all the technology in the world won't save you.
I've got nothing to add. I just wanted to take a moment to express my deep personal admiration for the campaign you've run and for the last weeks, and how, you know, the efforts that you and Nikushor and everyone from that have spent. And I feel that it was an extremely important moment in Romanian politics, and, you know, I've got nothing but true admiration. So thank you so much for that. And I don't know if it's protocol, but I actually want to applaud you. So
thank you.
Should we try that? And on that note, I think we're very constrained in terms of time. Let's open up the floor. If there are a couple of microphones going around, you're more than welcome to ask questions and make some comments. There's one coming right there.
Well, I've promised a question.
Andrei.
I'm going to try not to make it too easy. Or actually, the two separate questions for the two panelists. One, there's no polite way to ask that, particularly from Matei, but we're all friends, so I'm going to do it straightforward.
We always get a bit worried when you start with that.
Well, I had to do that. You're a staunch believer into what technology can offer both businesses and civil society, and I'm connecting it to the panel just previous yours. At the same time, you personally were on the flip side of it. You were the beneficiary of the long tail of this, having stuff thrown at you, partly because of how you used social media, or how Snowden-style active citizen intervention do that. My question to you is, one, did this in any way, shape, or form made you reconsider not how you stand on it, but how you look at it? And second is, if you put your business hat on, should businesses, and again I'm tying it in the prior conversation, should businesses think more about what risks, and I'm not talking business risk, but systemic risk come from technology when they develop a business model? And then investors what's the tool that investors should have into investing in countries, businesses, or sectors based on that systemic risk that technology brings about? And for you, Andrei, my question is, we've discussed throughout the three panels today about this interaction between technology and values. Whether it's economic value, so investor return, whether it's investing in values in terms of trust and social justice, or in terms of culture, heritage, and community. Now, we often see technology as a sui generis space that is a virtual space. Can that become also a physical space? And how do we go about doing that? Transitioning technology and technology-based solutions into physical space, and should people invest in that?
Good question. You know, I've obviously had time to think about your first question. And my answer has over and over again come to be the same, which is no. I don't regret having used technology the way I did. And I intend to do so again in the future. You know, Nikushor had a similar moment in the offline press. Some 15 years ago, he wrote a letter to some newspaper that became controversial 15 years later. You know, that I say that just to point out that you don't need necessarily Facebook to have that problem. I'm sure that if Facebook hadn't existed, I somehow would have managed to manifest my views, nevertheless, and you know, they would have been used against me as they have been recently, in spite of that. So you know, I'm certainly not upset with technology. I don't regret its existence or my involvement with it. It does make for greater transparency overall, which is a phenomenal thing, and we ourselves use that in terms of, you know, digging out the truth during our campaign against opponents and what have you. So it does flatten things quite a bit. It also makes it easy for people, of course, to take things out of context and to spin them however they wish, and to, you know, somehow what's funny about technology is that at the end of these 10 weeks, I've become, on one hand, you know, Putin's main KGB guy, while at the same time being funded by Soros, which is obviously, you know, stupidity. You can't do both.
That shows how smart you are.
That, have to say, that is a great position to be in.
I wish I were, you know, I wish I were. And obviously, you know, technology is at the root of that, but had it not been Facebook, I'm sure it would have been something else. You know. Now, moving on to your other question about systemic risk, I think that people and companies in general are hugely underestimating systemic risk, brought about by technological innovation. I think we as a society are hugely underestimating those risks as well. We have very little, I think, anticipation of what will happen in terms of changes in the labor force, changes in the way we as a society are organized. And I think everyone's happy clapping that they have Uber and that they have this and that, without really thinking through where this will lead. And I think the next decades will be tremendously challenging to our model of society that we've adopted. The model that we are living through now was developed as a result of the Industrial Revolution. We are now way past that. We've flown way past that. We're in the midst of a digital revolution where disintermediation is key, where entire labor sectors are being decimated and will be decimated. As societies, we are not prepared for that. Most of them haven't and are not making active plans to retrain people and so forth, you know, so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a very exciting time, to put it mildly. Your last question about tools that companies or that the investors can use. I mean, to be honest, I don't think there is any one tool. I mean, I think that really here I tend to go back to my educational roots and to say that really a multidisciplinary approach to risk or a holistic approach to risk, I think, is essential. I think in today's world there are too many specialists looking at risk from their own particular angle and missing the entire picture. I think Taleb is brilliant at expounding on that, and it's also, I mean, it's also the result of our educational system, which tends to push us in hyper specialized fields and what have you. But my best advice to investors is to really look at it from a as broad and as holistic view as possible, and then just wish for the best. I mean, I think hope is probably the best mechanism for dealing with that.
So, okay, to answer your question, I'm going to give two very pragmatic examples of what I'm doing right now. Both of them are related to this shopping mall that we're about to finish, which is next to the Obor market in Bucharest. It's extremely central, and it's a proximity shopping center, which means that we're relying mostly on people that live next to us. We're not relying on people from other cities to come to us. We're really building something for the community. How how the virtual interacts with bricks and mortar is both from the perspective, from the opportunity side. You now have technology that as soon as you are in the vicinity of it, as soon as you get off the tube stop of Obor, you'll have advertising pushing you towards it, whether it's on your mobile phone, whether it's through, you get a message on your mobile phone, either from the Starbucks app saying there's a Starbucks nearby, or from our own app, or from any number of apps on your phone that'll come up and realize that you're close by and push you towards our shopping center. And you know, we pay good money for that. That's what proximity below the line advertising is about. Once you enter the shopping center, you have video screens that may be aware of who you are. You may be welcomed by name. If it's your birthday, the screens will wish you happy birthday. That's reality, and for the most part, the infrastructure of doing that is actually extremely cheap. And that's the opportunity of bringing something that's virtual into something that's real. But there's also tremendous anxiety, because bricks and mortar retail is being very heavily disrupted by online sales. So as a landlord, a lot of the income that I get is based on the turnover of certain stores. And one of the things that's recently changed is that stores have become a bit like showrooms. You check out what you like, and then you order it online to be delivered to your home. You try on the size, you see what size fits you, but there's no point in buying it there and then. You want your hands free, or you have any number of reasons not to. So incorporating that element of online shopping in the real world and how you monetize that, whereas before it was very simple. You looked at the receipts at the end of the day, that was the part of the turnover that came to you. Furthermore, with brands using stores as a flagship rather than an actual sales platform, you've got to be very aware of how to really try and get back to at least what was the level of profitability that you'd expect from having strong brands in a shopping center. And that anxiety is coming into a conversation that's happening at the same time worldwide, because this isn't a problem only in Bucharest and Obor. You've got to make sure that anything that's delivered into a store, whether it's paid for online and collected in person, is accounted for. And that particular piece of legal, jargon that you insert into your lease agreement, that's not being done anywhere in the world, because everyone faces the same problem at the same time. And how you do it, how you negotiate it, it's really interesting, because you can actually create legal precedent for lease agreements, and you have an argument not with a lawyer that's local, but with H&M at their headquarters. So you have that. It's interesting and it's groundbreaking, but it creates a level of anxiety about how much of this works and how much of this will work, not even in 10 years, but in 5 years from now, how much you can actually get an income in a way that for the last 50 or even 100 years had been assured. This was the standard lease agreement. It's no longer standard, and it's no longer standard anywhere in the world. And as you build these things, from the infrastructure standpoint, it's easy. You've got to fit in extra server space, or you've got to fit in extra cabling in case the technology requires it. That's the easy part. But the way that you've got to imagine this potential disruptions to your business model and have to prepare for that in the long run, that's complicated, and everyone faces the problem at the same time.
I believe that we probably have time for one more question. I think let's wait for the mic to come around.
Yes, I would have a question. I agree that financing and the lack of financing is an issue right now here in Romania, but I'm not sure if That's the cause of that we don't have financing, and that's why the sector is not developing quicker, or we don't have financing because we don't have what to finance here, because there aren't really major projects that I would say that didn't receive any financing. But my real question would be, let's go forward in the digital era, and let's say that, okay, we are 10 years back now, but let's look what's going to happen in 10 years. It's the Internet of Things. Would that be a solution for Romania and for Romania's digital sector to focus on IoT? Would it be a solution to finance what they are going to develop or trying to develop to crowdfunding? Because again, there you have products that you can grasp, that you can hold in your hand. It's bricks and mortar again. It's not a solution which maybe it's copied from some place outside or what you can already find. Would this be a solution for our technological industry and the digital industry to focus on this?
Well, I think crowdfunding is definitely a possible way out of this impasse. But ultimately, again, what it is just a bridge to financing, most likely outside of Romania. But at least it's accessible. So that's obviously a good thing. I think that one of the biggest impediments to funding here is not so much lack of projects, of which I run into quite frequently, but it's the lack of the incipient levels of the funding food chain. You don't have the friends and family, and you don't have the angel investors that are so critical in taking on that initial piece of risk. And obviously, those that make it through these initial levels are then more in a position to reach out to funds based outside of Romania and so on and so forth. But again, clearly, crowdfunding I think is one path that I would encourage people to explore. The Internet of Things is obviously, that's just another frontier that's come up recently. One of our public policy initiatives, this is me putting on my campaign hat again, was to fill Bucharest with sensors, literally hundreds of thousands of sensors, and then to make it an open system to accessible to anyone. I think something like that would have clearly have furthered the potential of the Internet of Things. Because to have the Internet of Things, you need things, you need sensors, you need, if you're in a lab somewhere or, in a constrained environment, it's going to be more difficult. But for that to really fly, you need to do what other cities have done. I think Barcelona has done that, and some other things have done that. And if we don't do that, we're going to be missing that boat as well.
Right.
Do you have anything to add?
I do. I agree with that. It's completely, it comes through good planning, and I completely agree that there's a lack of a financing ecosystem as well. It's depressing to see it, and it's because you do get good ideas, and whether the Internet of Things or virtual reality or any of these fields is worth exploring. Wouldn't set a target for one particular field to the detriment of all others, but it's just about having better funding, better pool of resources to finance all these very, very interesting projects. And just come back to what I've said in the first time. I'm optimistic that this is a phase. That this is a phase that we're going through where Romanians are learning how to work and they're learning the landscape of the industry by working with international companies, or working abroad, working in international companies. And I have no doubt that some of these people will return and will have a lot more success in the future, and we'll probably come back and remember this phase as, the chrysalis phase, the moment where you're just waiting to gather that know-how And in a few years, we will have venture capital and proper IT financing infrastructure in this country.
I think we've heard quite a bit of pessimism from these two gentlemen here about both the lack of risky capital in Romania and the lack of progress, probably. But I would like to point out that there is one thing that Matei and Andrei do share, and they've both been educated abroad, probably grew up or brought up outside of Romania. They both came back. And one's running the campaign for Nicu Șordan, and the other one's building a shopping center in Bucharest. So I think those probably speak even louder than the words. I think that concludes our session today. We're more than happy to continue the conversation at dinner. Let's thank our panelists for their contributions today, as well as to a larger extent what they contribute to our society. Let's have a round of applause.